The last thing my mother said to me before she closed the door was that she hoped I'd find a way to live with what I'd done. I stood on the porch of the house I grew up in, my hands shaking, my chest so tight I could barely pull in a breath. It was raining, the kind of cold November rain that soaks through your coat before you even realize it started. I remember staring at the peephole on the front door, half expecting it to open again. It didn't. I heard her footsteps walk away. I heard my father say something low and quiet on the other side. Then nothing. I was 24 years old. I had a backpack full of textbooks and a clear conscience and nowhere to go. That was 8 years ago. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. And the beginning, like most painful things, started with my sister. Growing up, my sister Danielle was everything in our house. 3 years older than me, sharper with words, faster with a smile, and she had a way of making my parents feel like whatever she said was simply the final version of the truth. My father called her his little doctor from the time she was 10 years old, even though it was actually me who used to sit in the hallway outside his home office reading his old anatomy textbooks. My mother liked to say Danielle had her instincts. She meant medical instincts. She meant Danielle was the one who was going to carry the family legacy forward. My father had been a physician's assistant for 30 years. My mother had worked the front desk of a pediatric clinic for almost as long. Medicine wasn't just a career in our family. It was closer to a religion. Danielle became a registered nurse at 22. My parents threw her a dinner party. My mother cried. My father gave a toast that lasted 11 minutes, I counted. I started my nursing program at the same university 2 years later. I was a good student, not the kind who made it look easy, but the kind who stayed in the library until it closed and then sat in her car in the parking lot with a flashlight. I wanted it that way. I wanted to earn it so completely that no one could take it from me. That was the part I got wrong. The trouble started in the spring of my second year. Danielle had taken a position at the same hospital affiliated with our university's clinical program. She was technically a preceptor for some of the second-year students, which meant she held a certain amount of unofficial authority over how we were evaluated in clinical rotations. I didn't think much about it at the time. She was my sister. I trusted her the way you trust the floor beneath you without thinking about it at all. In March, I was called into the program director's office and told that a formal complaint had been filed against me. Someone had reported seeing me remove 2 vials of a controlled substance from the medication room without signing them out. The allegation was that I had taken them for personal use. I hadn't. I hadn't been anywhere near that medication room on the date and time listed. I had been in simulation lab doing a skills checkoff that was witnessed by 2 instructors and 4 other students. The whole thing should have collapsed under basic scrutiny, but the complaint had come from a licensed nurse on staff. A credible source, they told me. Someone the hospital took seriously. They never told me who filed it. I didn't find out until later. The investigation took 6 weeks. 6 weeks during which I was suspended from clinical hours, barred from the hospital floor, and watched carefully by every administrator I passed in the hallway. 6 weeks during which my sister called home every Sunday and told our parents, in careful, sorrow-heavy tones, that she was worried about me, that she had tried to talk to me but I wouldn't listen, that she was afraid I had developed a problem. I didn't know any of this was happening. I was too busy gathering every shred of evidence I could find: security logs, sign-out sheets, witness statements from my classmates trying to clear my name through official channels the way I'd been told to do. I was doing everything right. I was following every rule. Meanwhile, my sister was writing the story for our parents at home. When my father called me in mid-April, his voice was different. Flat, in a way I'd never heard from him before. He said they'd been talking to Danielle. He said they were concerned. He said the school had contacted them, which wasn't true. The school had not contacted them, and I said so immediately. He said he didn't know what to believe anymore. I drove home that weekend. I sat across from my parents at the kitchen table where I'd done homework and eaten 1,000 dinners, and I told them everything. The investigation. The evidence I'd gathered. The timeline that made the allegation impossible. My mother listened with her hands folded in her lap and an expression I'd never seen on her face before, not exactly disbelief, but something worse. A kind of careful distance, like she was hearing a story about a stranger. Danielle wasn't there. She was working, my mother said. My father asked me, quietly, whether there was anything I wanted to tell them, whether there was something going on in my life that I needed help with. I understood then what had already been decided. I was cleared by the university 3 weeks later. Full exoneration. The complaint was found to be unsubstantiated. The witness who had supposedly seen me turned out not to exist in any verifiable form. I was reinstated to my clinical hours, issued a formal letter of clearance, and told I could resume my program without any notation on my academic record. I called my parents the same night the letter arrived. My mother answered, and I told her. I told her I had the documentation. I told her I could bring it, mail it, send it digitally, whatever they needed. I just needed them to know. She said she was glad the school had sorted things out. I asked if that meant they believed me now. There was a pause I've never been able to forget. And then she said what she said about living with what I'd done. And I heard the click of the call ending. And that was that. I drove to their house the next day. My mother opened the door, looked at me for a long moment, and said it would be better if I didn't come by for a while. My father appeared behind her and didn't say anything at all. I stood there until she closed the door. I tried twice more over the next month. Once my father answered and told me they needed time. The second time, nobody came to the door, even though I could see the lights inside and my mother's car in the driveway. After that, my calls went straight to voicemail. Then they stopped going to voicemail. Then the number I had for my mother returned a message saying it was no longer in service, and I understood that wasn't an accident. My sister never called me. Not once. I finished my nursing program. I graduated the following December with a 3.9 gigapascals and a recommendation letter from my clinical director that used the word exceptional twice. I stood in the auditorium in my white uniform with the other graduates and looked out at the rows of families and told myself it didn't matter that the seats where my parents would have sat were empty. I told myself that enough times that I almost believed it. I took a position at a Level I trauma center 60 miles from home. I was good at trauma nursing, maybe because everything about it demanded your complete attention and left no room for anything else. In the emergency bay, at 2 a.m, with a patient bleeding and a physician shouting and 4 other nurses moving around you in choreographed urgency, there is no space inside your head for grief. That was the part of the job I was most grateful for. I sent Christmas cards home every year. I don't entirely know why. Maybe because I couldn't fully accept that the door was permanently closed. Maybe because I needed to feel like I was still reaching, even if nothing reached back. I always used my work address on the return label. It said the name of the hospital, clearly the city, the department, the floor. I never got a response. I went back to school at 27. My attending physician had been quietly suggesting it for over a year, and eventually I stopped arguing with her about it. I applied to medical school, took the MCAT while working 30-hour shifts, and was accepted to a program 2 states away. I deferred for a year to save money, then packed everything I owned into a storage unit and moved into a studio apartment near campus. I was 31 when I matched into emergency medicine residency. I called my best friend from nursing school from the parking lot outside the hospital and cried so hard I couldn't finish a sentence. She cried too, which helped. I got married at 32. My husband was a hospitalist I'd met during my 3rd year of residency, a quiet, steady man named Thomas, who had the rare and valuable quality of never once making me feel like I had to explain the parts of my life that hurt. We got married at the courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 witnesses and went out for dinner afterward. It was exactly what I wanted. My daughter was born 11 months later. I sent a birth announcement home. I don't know why I kept doing it. I think some part of me believed that a grandchild would be the thing that finally broke through. I got nothing back. I told myself I had done my part. I told myself I would stop waiting. I became an attending physician in emergency medicine 2 months before my daughter turned 1. I was board certified, salaried, and carrying more debt than I could comfortably think about. But I was there. I was the doctor. I walked into trauma bays and people looked to me for the answer. And I gave it. None of my family saw any of it happen. I had not spoken to my parents in 8 years when my father came through my emergency department on a Saturday in October. I was the senior attending on duty. It was mid-afternoon and we were busy, not catastrophically, but steadily, the way a Saturday afternoon in a regional trauma center tends to be. I was finishing a chart when one of my residents appeared in the doorway and said we had a 63-year-old male incoming, suspected cardiac event, unstable rhythm, EMS estimated 2 minutes. I closed the chart and walked to the bay. He came through the doors on a gurney, oxygen mask over his face, Two paramedics rattling off vitals in the clipped shorthand of people who need you to hear everything at once. His color was bad, a grayish pallor I'd seen too many times. His eyes were open and tracking, but unfocused. He was holding on, but not by much. I was already moving toward him, already talking to my team, already running the protocol in my head, when the woman who had come in behind the gurney grabbed my arm. I turned. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair had gone mostly gray. She was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize, and her eyes were wide with the specific kind of terror that only comes when the person you love most is in danger. She looked at me. And I watched her see me, really see me, the way you see something that doesn't fit the picture you've been carrying in your head for years. The white coat, the badge with my name and credentials, the resident stepping back to give me room, the nurse who handed me a tablet and called me doctor without pausing. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. I had exactly 2 seconds to feel the full weight of that moment. 2 seconds where 8 years of silence and hurt and Christmas cards with no response stood in the space between us, where my father was dying on a gurney and my mother was looking at me like she was seeing a ghost. Then I turned back to my father and did my job. The next 40 minutes were the most focused of my life. Not because the case was unusually complex, it was a serious arrhythmia complicated by a partially blocked vessel, something we managed with intervention and medication, and a level of coordinated precision that my team executed without hesitation. But because I was aware, in some peripheral part of my brain that refused to fully shut off, that my mother was 15 feet away on the other side of a curtain, and that my father's life was the thing my hands were currently responsible for, I did not let that awareness inside the work. I had trained too long and too hard to let anything inside the work. When it was over, when his rhythm had stabilized and he was breathing on his own and the acute crisis had passed, I stepped out and pulled the curtain back. My mother was sitting in a plastic chair against the wall. She had her hands pressed flat against her thighs like she needed something solid to hold on to. She looked up at me and I could see she had been crying. I pulled another chair across the floor and sat down in front of her. I kept my voice level. I told her what had happened, what we had done, what the next steps would be. I told her his prognosis was cautiously optimistic if we moved forward with the recommended procedure. I answered every question she asked with the same careful clarity I would give to any family member in that chair. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said my name, just my name, in a voice I hadn't heard in 8 years. I waited. "How long?" she said. "How long have you been here? At this hospital?" 3 years. She looked around the bay at the equipment, at the team moving efficiently in the background, at the badge clipped to my coat. "You're a doctor," she said. It wasn't really a question. "I'm an attending physician in emergency medicine. Yes." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were filling again. "Rachel." "Mom." I said it quietly. "We don't have to do this right now. Right now we need to focus on what comes next for Dad. Everything else can wait." She nodded. She was trying very hard to hold herself together and not quite managing it. I stood up. I told her one of my nurses would come sit with her and answer questions. I told her I would personally check back within the hour. I was almost to the curtain when she spoke again. "She told us you'd been caught stealing," my mother said. "She told us you admitted it." She said you told her yourself. I stopped. I didn't turn around yet. "She said you were ashamed and you didn't want us to know, but she thought we deserved to hear it from someone who loved you." I turned then. I looked at my mother, at this woman who had raised me and then believed a version of me that had never existed, and I felt something complicated and exhausted move through my chest. "I was cleared, Mom. Within 6 weeks. I mailed you the documentation. I called. I drove to the house. I stood on the porch. I paused. I sent you a letter when I graduated nursing school. I sent you a letter when I got into medical school. I sent you a card when I matched into residency. I sent you an announcement when your granddaughter was born." I stopped. "I have a daughter. Her name is Clara. She's 2 years old. She has Dad's eyes." My mother put her hand over her mouth. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," I said. "I'm saying it because you deserve to know what was real. And because if Dad pulls through this, and I intend for him to pull through this, I don't want to have left anything unsaid." I went back to the chart room. I sat at a workstation and stared at the screen for probably 90 seconds before I was able to start typing. One of my residents appeared in the doorway and asked if I was okay, and I told him I was, and I meant it because I was. I was okay. I had not fallen apart. I had done the job. That was the thing about 8 years, it teaches you how to carry weight without letting it drag you under. My father was moved to the cardiac care unit that evening. He was awake and alert by the time I came up to check on him. Propped slightly forward on the hospital pillows, my mother sitting beside him with her hand over his. He looked at me the way my mother had, that same recalibrating stare, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he knew. "Your mother told me," he said. His voice was rough from the oxygen mask and from what I suspected was also emotion. "You don't need to worry about any of that right now," I said. "You need to rest and let the team here monitor you, Rachel." He said my name with a weight to it that I hadn't heard since I was a child. "Your mother told me everything. About your daughter." I sat down in the chair on the other side of the bed. The three of us were quiet for a moment in the way that only happens when too much has gone unsaid for too long, and the silence is the only honest thing left. "I should have called the university myself," my father said. "The day Danielle told us, I should have picked up the phone." "Yes," I said. "You should have." He closed his eyes briefly. "I trusted her. She's our daughter and I. She's your daughter, and so am I." I said it evenly, without anger, because the anger had mostly burned itself out a long time ago. What remained was something quieter and more honest. And I needed you to act like it. Not eventually. Not after I'd proven myself to your satisfaction. From the start. My mother made a sound low in her throat. "I don't need an apology tonight," I said. "And I'm not in a position to give you reassurances right now about what any of this looks like going forward. What I can tell you is that I'm here. I'm going to make sure Dad gets through this. And if you want to know who I actually am, the person I've been for the last 8 years, I'm willing to have that conversation when the time is right." I stood up. I checked my father's chart one more time, told them both good night, and walked out of the room. In the elevator going back down to the ED, I took a breath that came from somewhere deep in my chest, the kind you don't realize you've been holding for years. The fluorescent lights in the elevator were harsh and unflattering, and I stood there under them with my white coat and my name badge and the slightly too tight feeling in my throat that comes just before tears. I didn't cry. I thought about my daughter and the way she smelled after bath time and the small, solid weight of her when she fell asleep on my shoulder. I thought about Thomas, who would be home right now, probably feeding her dinner and making a mess of the kitchen the way he always did. I thought about calling him on the drive home, hearing his voice, telling him the whole story. The elevator doors opened. My pager went off. There was a trauma incoming. I walked back into the department and got to work. My father was discharged 11 days later. By that point, my mother had spent enough hours in that hospital to see me in motion, to see the nurses defer to me, to see families clutch my arm in gratitude, to see the resident physicians trail me on rounds with their clipboards and their careful attention. She watched all of it with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between pride and grief and a shame that seemed to sit heavily on her. She asked to have coffee with me on my lunch break on day 8. We sat in the hospital cafeteria and talked for an hour, the most honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. She told me what Danielle had said over those early weeks. The specific words, the constructed picture, how she had laid the story out over months, carefully, the way you lay out bricks one at a time, so you don't notice you're building a wall until it's already too high to see over. I listened without interrupting. Then I told her something I had rehearsed and discarded and come back to many times over the years. I told her that what hurt most wasn't that she had believed Danielle initially. It was that she had never asked me. That she had received documentation of my clearance and said she was glad things had been sorted out, as though the question of whether her daughter was innocent had been an administrative matter all along. That she had looked at 8 years of Christmas cards sent from a hospital floor and never once thought to wonder what was on the other side of that address. She cried. I didn't. I held my coffee cup in both hands and looked at the window and let her. She asked what she could do. I told her that was a bigger question than a cafeteria lunch could hold. I told her I needed to talk to Thomas. I told her I needed to think about Clara, about what it meant to introduce my daughter to people who had not shown up when it counted, about the kind of relationship I was willing to build and the pace I was willing to build it at. I told her that the door wasn't closed, but that I was the one who was going to decide how wide it opened and how quickly. She nodded. She looked like she wanted to say more and thought better of it. As for Danielle, my mother told me, without my asking, that she had called Danielle the same night of my father's admission. She had told Danielle what she'd seen. She'd told her she wanted to hear the truth this time. Danielle had not offered the truth. She had offered a revised version, then another, then a third. My mother had stopped asking questions. My father, when he was strong enough to have the conversation, had been less quiet about his feelings than my mother expected. I don't know what will happen between them. That's not my situation to resolve. It never was. What I know is that I drove home that Friday night after my father was discharged, walked through the front door, and found Thomas asleep on the couch with Clara tucked against his chest, both of them out cold, a half-eaten bowl of crackers on the coffee table. I stood in the doorway of my own living room in my coat and my work bag and looked at the two of them for a long time. Then I hung up my coat and went and sat on the edge of the couch cushion and put my hand over Clara's small back to feel her breathe. She was fine. She was warm and safe and completely unbothered by any of it. I had built this. Out of 8 years of silence and distance and closed doors and letters that went unanswered, I had built this, the job, the family, the life. It wasn't the life that started from the porch of my parents' house in the rain. It was something different. Something I had chosen and earned in every specific detail. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. There are things I'm still figuring out. My parents call now. My mother calls more than my father, but he calls two short, slightly stilted conversations that feel like practice runs for something longer. I answer most of them. I'm honest when I'm not in a place to talk, and I say so without apology. Clara met her grandparents for the first time on a Sunday afternoon in December. We went to a park, neutral ground, my choice. My mother cried the moment she saw her, which startled Clara and made her press her face into my leg for the first 30 seconds. Then she decided my father's coat zipper was interesting and spent 10 minutes pulling it up and down while he stood very still and let her. Thomas held my hand the whole time. I don't know what it becomes. I'm not standing here with a resolution wrapped up tight, because that's not actually how it works. What I have is a set of facts. I have a daughter who now knows her grandparents' names. I have a father whose heart is beating because my hands helped keep it that way. I have a mother who is carrying the weight of what she failed to do, and who is, I think, genuinely trying to carry it without excuses. And I have the memory of standing in that emergency bay at 32 years old in a white coat with my name on it, looking at the woman who had closed the door in my face 8 years earlier, and choosing very deliberately, without hesitation, to do my job. Not to prove a point, not to collect what I was owed, just because it was the right thing to do, and because it was who I was. That hasn't changed. It was always who I was. That's the part they got wrong about me, and the part I never needed them to confirm.